Okay, I should be recording at this point, so let's, um, yeah. All right. Well, first off, welcome everybody, and what I'm doing is these are courses. This WMS course, this both the 101 and the 102 courses are the courses that I teach at AXUG, and they're intended to give people a very good indoctrination in warehouse management. What we're going to be doing today is primarily focusing on theory. My belief that, you know, first off, education is for any level of where you are within the process, but also I also believe it's very important. I think what differentiates what I do or try to do and what other trainers try to do is one is benefit of my experience, also to also give you the evolve how the industry evolved and why there's a need and what this actually does for you and why it's important. Now, one of the other things I think is important for you to know that this, I believe, other than places like Logic Apps, which you don't know how well that's going to do. I believe they're going to do exceptionally well if there's if we get enough people adopting them and being able to provide the training and stuff. But from the functional areas, this may be one of the hottest areas going forward. Also, for non-financial people, it is a natural progression from trade and logistics. Because one thing about warehouses, they don't care anything about cost or inventory transactions. They only care about moving and efficiencies, and those transactions are set up to the ERP system to get finalized within the financial system. So there isn't a lot of talking about financial setups or anything like that in this. So this is a natural progression. Okay, we've talked about me plenty of times, but you know, as part of the by the way, I also received a granted award in 2018, and I was selected for 2018 for MVP. But I've been around a while, is what it really boils down to. Okay, so here's what the agenda is going to be today. Okay, first off, what are the problems, or I think more appropriate, the challenges of supply chain? It's my belief that if I had $100,000 and $200,000 to spend, and I were a company, personally, I can think of a lot better ways to spend money. But if I were a company and I wanted to say, where is the best place to spend money to improve my process the most dramatically, I'm going to suggest to you it's your WMS system. And being a long-time ERP implementer, that's saying a lot about where you can gain the efficiencies. And what I hope to capture for you today is why this is such a big problem and what the evolution was to the problem and why this used correctly solves the problem. Because think about how much money you spend in a warehouse operation, how much money you spend in inventory, and how important it is to get throughput through that inventory operation. So anything we can do to streamline that process or improve that accuracy can easily pay for itself over the long run. So next we're going to go into talking about what is a warehouse management system. You know, a warehouse management system is a set of tools that allow us to more efficiently handle warehouse operations. So we're going to talk about all the different organizational elements so you understand. And by the way, what we're talking about, although there be specific references to 365 components, we're talking about all WMS systems. So this is, again, a theory course really sharing with you what all these elements are. Like I worked with designing interfaces for Manhattan Systems. That's a large WMS system. Then we're just going to start going through some of the processes so you can start to get familiar with what these processes look like within a WMS system. One nice thing about a WMS system is it is inclusive of integrated barcode and scanning as part of its architecture. So you get that up front. And the other point I want to make is that people think of barcode and scanning as a solution. It's not. It's a tool. It has to be integrated to an effective system to be utilized. Otherwise, it really doesn't fulfill its purpose other than maybe increase some accuracy. Okay. Oh, okay. That's, again, we're saying that typically a properly implemented and positioned WMS system can receive a return on investment within an 18 months period. So that gives you an idea how much savings and how much opportunity there is in WMS. You don't have to agree with that, but I worked for a company for a while. Well, I actually sold my company to a company who specialized in warehouse management consultation. So I was able to leverage off of that. And if you really think about it, and you think about how inefficient most warehouses are run, the opportunity savings is immense because too often people don't see some of the other facts that are important. And that's so. So again, what I'm saying is think about the opportunities. In my way of thinking, the most exciting thing about consulting is to leave making the company better than what they were. And I'll tell a brief story, and because we're not, we can go as long as you're willing to listen to me. I can't go real long today because I have a meeting after this. But I worked for Genuine Parts, and not worked for the company. I was a consulting company there, and we were implementing our first implementation with them. And Genuine Parts, if you know it, they're the Napa people. I was working primarily with companies that they had acquired to vertically integrate their product line. So you might have a company that does brake shoes. You might have a company that they own that this was the large vehicle or trucking inventory group. But they were one of the worst performing divisions in the organization. They were pathetic. We went in and implemented them, and the first day we brought up the system, they had their best shipping day ever. That doesn't happen all the time, by the way. And within 2 years, they were leading their division, primarily because of the strength of the WMS system. I'd like to also think that AX and the planning and everything like that also helped too, but primarily that improvement had to do with the WMS system. Because they were primarily a distributor. So a distributor, when you think about it, that's primarily what their planning is, to make sure they buy it from the planning side, but make sure they can get it to where the point of need efficiently. Okay? I hope that gets you excited about it. So let's talk about the supply chain. The supply chain, if you think about it, covers everything from when it hits the door to its ultimate point of need, to anything that goes out the door, and then taking everything that is needed to do that, to get it to the customer. So really what we're talking about is all your warehouse operations, all your transportation operations, all your shipping and receiving, all your picking and packing, everything goes into what is called your supply chain. Now, the WMS is part of the overall supply chain. It's primarily the warehousing operations themselves, but that's what the supply chain is it covers all those things. And to me, it's one of the most difficult problems that a company has. And I think I covered some of these reasons why that is that way. So I'm not going to go into it now, but that's all of these things that have to happen. So problems. Well, who do you think has the most impact on whether a customer is happy or not? Most people would say sales or customer service. I'm going to suggest to you the execution of the supply chain is the most critical aspect for customer satisfaction. How happy do you think they'll be if we send them the wrong part? How happy will they be, if we don't have it labeled right? So really, your supply chain is one of your most critical areas that drives customer satisfaction. So that means the proper operation, getting things there on time. Keep in mind that outside of the scope of that is what happens in the ERP system, and that's getting the materials to the warehouse. But once it's in the warehouse, the supply chain effectively can manage that process very effectively. Also, I want you to think about all the variables. When people work in production or most aspects of their business, they are working with a fairly finite set of variables. I'm not saying that there aren't that the variables there's not many variables that they have, but they're fairly linear. What about a customer? Well, think about it. Customer might have special labeling. It might have special reporting. It might have a special documentation requirement. It can go on, routing requirements, on and on and on and on that are unique to that customer relationship as defined by the negotiation of the business dealings. That all has to be accomplished within the WMS system. Everybody else are just providing certain packages and things like that, but up to the WMS system, now a lot of the variables for labeling and things like that occur at that point. Another thing that's very important, I'm going to share with some history about some of my designs in the past. If you're going to really optimize your efficiencies, the process must support parallel processes. In short, how I might handle let's say a Walmart order is totally different than I might handle a rush order or small package orders. So what it really means is you've got to be able to have a process that optimizes the situation. In other words, when you think of a warehouse, it's not a single-threaded process. You don't take one process and that's what you use all the time. If you are, you're not really dealing with the WMS system. We'll talk about that. You're dealing with what's called pay points, but you're not optimizing anything. So you must be able to support multiple parallel processes within a supply chain. And of course, one of the other things you have is you have to be able to manage multiple locations, and they can be geographically, they can be countries, it can be, think about all of the different variabilities you have about. In other words, there's a science just saying people will go in and analyze things and say this is the best place to actually put a warehouse. So there's help on that kind of thing to say strategically where's the best place to put warehouses. Some of those kind of functions are part of the supply chain. Okay, it's usually not too hard to see something is not implemented very well. So let's talk about poorly implemented supply chain strategies. Think about it. They're typically going to be pick to order. The reason why is they have no architecture to organize things. And if they do, it's primarily manually. Where they may group orders together manually and you might pick them together. But generally, when you talk about a poor WMS strategy, it's purely pick to order. So it doesn't account for any other optimizations because it's the picking process that actually has the most overhead in most systems. You've got a poorly designed warehouse. How you've got your warehouse laid out is just wrong. And I'm going to suggest to you that a WMS system isn't going to help that, but it is an indication of a poorly implemented supply chain strategy. And most of them have been something where they've evolved rather than actually had a plan behind that evolution. Here's the key. If you can't stage product, you cut down dramatically on your throughput. So there must be a relationship between the places you're working on preparing orders and the places you're putting materials in to satisfy orders. Here's another indication. They spend more time picking than packing. Well, think about that. Packing requires you to put things in a box, tape them, all this kind of things, print labels and all that kind of stuff. It really should be more time in packing than picking if you have a properly optimized picking system. And the other thing, I just want to throw this out, is that a good supply chain should indicate a linear ability to service a higher number of orders or a demonstrated capacity to expand as the need changes. A poorly implemented means is if, let's say, like I won't name the company, but at Christmas time they had to put 20 or so more people in their warehouse, and think about how effective that was. We've got now 15 more people in the warehouse that are temporaries, and you're now trying to get more volume out than any other time of the year. It's not only inefficient, it also is usually not very successful. Another thing, if you poorly implement, a larger staff. Got a problem, we throw more people in it. We don't improve the process, we just increase the volume. Or we increase capability or capacity. Another thing you're going to see is poor customer service. The reason why? They don't have an idea what's going on out there. There's no visibility to anybody else in the organization. There's poor visibility to processes or where the inventory is actually at within the system. And usually it's poor accuracy, poor following up, poor everything. Never hitting the dates. And the other thing is poor receiving. Think about it. If you receive it and you put it someplace and nobody knows where that is, that's the beginning step to the overall downstream problems you're going to have. Because if you don't put it away right the first time, everything else gets worse from there. In other words, the typical thing is these kind of companies spend more time looking for it than actually doing it. That's a problem. And by the way, inventory accuracy is not just based on having the right quantity. You must also incorporating it also being in the right location. And that's exactly what you want to strive for. And really what we're talking about is accuracy in your transactions is what we're trying to do. Okay.
Yes.
So warehouse systems, WMS. Okay. So I'll tell you again, part of what we're supposed to, is consultant. I had worked for a company, and this was before the AX days. I'd worked for a company, and we've designed a lot of things for them for optimizing some of their processes. They brought me out one time and says, look, we've got problems with inventory. We want you to make recommendations as to what we can do to solve this problem. So I went through and made these sweeping number of recommendations, and the sum net total of that is they did none of them. I can't remember what the reason was, but this is something like 5 years later. I went back, and everything I'd recommended, they had done. And I said, Mike, what happened here? This is all the stuff we talked about. He says, well, he says, the problem was it took two other consultants to tell us the same thing before we actually did anything. So it's a matter of you can have the right ideas and recommendations, and I guess one of the things I want to share with you in this business is a customer is not obligated to take your advice. To me, it's kind of foolish you're paying somebody to give them advice and they don't take it. I always tell them the only thing they're obligated to do is to pay for it. You must be thick-skinned to some extent and understand that the best plans and the best advice doesn't always come through to the best outcome. Advice is only valid if it's taken for the most part. So let's talk about what our goals are. And these are goals that is in any warehouse system. One of the things you want to do is increase warehouse throughput. And what's the reason for that? Well, I can think of number of things right off the top of my head. If we increase the throughput, we increase the availability of cash flow. The quicker from the time we get the order to the time we get the money, anything we can do to shorten that improves our cash flow. It also reduces what's in your inventory. You really want to think about inventory turns, an older concept, or actually inventory velocity is a more common one that says, how does this flow through the warehouse? What is the quickest? Identifying those opportunities. Increase accuracy. If you are inaccurate in your transacting, you're going to not only create the problem of not knowing where it's at and not knowing what you have, you're going to also then expand that over to the user side where you don't pick accurately. And if you don't pick accurately, one of the worst things you can do is send a customer the wrong product. That is a worse mistake in my way of thinking than getting them the order late. Getting the order late, they might forgive you, but if you send them the wrong product, they begin to question you as a vendor. Better use of space. How many people keep adding building after building after building because they've got more stuff, but the business growth doesn't really determine that. They just are not very efficient. Lower inventory. You should be able to carry a lower inventory so that you're more servicing the needs of the customers rather than carrying inventory in case of eventualities. So we want to, part of it is we want to improve efficiency. How can we more efficiently pick items to support a large order? How can we more efficiently identify priorities versus non-priorities? Okay. You also want to improve the flow, and that's kind of what I'm alluding to here. What is the best process for this subset of elements? And when I talk about that, it could be based on group of products. It could be it could be based on a group of customers. It could be based on a single customer. It could be based on a carrier. I mean, think about all the possibilities for possibly optimizing a process so that you're really driving the efficiency. Like everything is, we've got yellow freight that's coming in on Wednesday. How best to support that process? We always want to improve customer service and satisfaction with us. Customers typically don't leave unless they're dissatisfied. You know, you can be at a higher price point. I'm not saying that's universally true, but they're going to think twice about leaving you if they're happy with your service. You have to have within the system the ability to support individual customer needs, and that might be labeling, routings, those types of things. And you want a system that's flexible enough to at least to be able to address some of those special needs. Um, and also, more than anything else, you want to be able to change the process to meet changing requirements. And I'm going to be talking a lot about this. If you want to, you've got to have a system where you can design the processes, so to speak, because situations can change, and therefore processes can change. You need a system that can meet those challenges rather than we've got now another process, we've got to bring the developer in. We need something that is more flexible than that and more user under the user's control. Okay. So what is a warehouse management system? It's a business application. Really, it's just another app. It really controls flow within and between DCs. And when you think of the DC is a common term for distribution center, also is synonymous with the warehouse. So a distribution center, it's to control materials flowing between. Because when you talk about it, you're not just talking about shipments to customers. You're talking about shipments to other warehouses. And the other thing is a real-time inventory tracking system. That's important. Because if we're going to get to the next level in implementation of a process like this, we've got to have real time. When we do it, we have to know we've done it and reflect that in the system. And one of your biggest problems is the lack of real-time inventory availability. So the only way we can do that is to put the transaction at the point of the physical transaction. So the computer transaction and the physical transaction have to occur at the same time. And then the physical and the warehouse system are in sync, and our information system is therefore in sync also. Okay, what it's not, any of the rest of this stuff. A WMS system is specifically to run the warehouse processes. It doesn't care about cost. Some of them will have a cost interface to them so they can look at value over efficiency, some of those kind of things. But within the WMS system, there's no financial transactions. There's no cost transactions. There's purely inventory movements and measurements of inventory efficiencies. How does an advanced WMS help this? Well, here's the first and most important thing. It's based on what I like to call a rules-based system. To me, a rules-based system is a system that allows an individual that is not necessarily a developer to change and support new business rules. In other words, a system that is configurable to meet the best process. And that's really what the difference is between a WMS system and earlier systems, which you're going to identify. In other words, the key is that you can define the processes to, okay, so you can define the process so that the inventory is not outside of the system. And let me explain what I mean by that. I'll be getting into a little bit more, but most of the systems have as a pay point. In other words, you initiate a picking process, but you don't know it's picked till somebody tells you, right? You have nothing to identify those things that might have been happening in between, like a staging. So if you think about it, here's the question we get asked a lot of times. Why do I need a WMS system? Just looks like a lot of complexity to me. You need a WMS system if you want to improve your process, become more efficient, and become more competitive. Now, I'm not talking about somebody that ships 10 orders a day, unless they're 10 really, really, really big orders. But for most people can benefit from a WMS. And also, it's my belief, anytime you implement AX without the WMS, or 365 now without the WMS, it's a mistake. And I've got people that do it all the time because they're afraid of the WMS system. We do what we call dumbing it down. So we make it very simple, very easy, and there's no reason not to implement it. And so again, coming back to what we're doing is that rules-based process. The goal of the rules-based process is not only to be able to standardize the process, but to be able to control the process so that it doesn't have inventory out of the process where it just disappears. And I'll talk to you about why that is the way it is in WMS. And also to have something to measure against. If you have no standard that says from the time I tell you to pick it, this is the process you go through, and these are the points you report against, I have no measurement criteria. If I want to measure something, I have to define a standard process. From there, I can now define a standard set of expectations, is what we're really trying to do. So, again, it's optimized for the situation. It is more efficient. It makes better use of people and equipment because you can actually control what you release, how you release it, who you release it to, where it goes to get what it needs. So if it needs a pallet, it's picking a pallet rather than 24 eaches and trying to pack them. These are, and also better able to handle customer unique requirements in a rules-based system. So in short, you don't need a developer, you just need a configurator within a rules-based system. Okay? Real-time transactions. Well, how good is the decision you make on your inventory if your transactions are only as good as what happened last night? I can guarantee you not very good. So the more we move towards real time, the more we can actually rely on the inventory that's out there, including, by the way, what comes out of production. It doesn't make any difference whether you complete it in production if nobody knows about it. You can't ship it. You don't know it's there. I mean, so just some of these simple things, you can begin to see how amazingly, how easy it is to actually become more efficient by improving that visibility and this accuracy based on real-time transactions. And also, it's also going to promote inventory accuracy because you can have validations that have to occur within these real-time transactions. In other words, scanning the location you put it in is a validation. So you can define they've got what they have to scan to say this is a completed process. You've got zones, and again, they're better to optimize workspace, and it also to be able to use as an element to segregate and optimize processes. The most typical example we use is zones is the difference between the freezer and the cold storage or refrigerator. Obviously, frozen foods you want to go to the freezer. Non-frozen foods, you may want to go to a different location. Produce, you might go to a cooler. So therefore, not making it the decision of the person putting it away, telling the person where it's supposed to be put away to, so they don't have to make that decision. We also talk about zones and how we might want to segregate pallets of inventory versus units of inventory. Okay, and like I said, it also incorporates in the planning for people, because you can look at a zone that says this is how much work I have within a zone. We did talk a little bit about validations. They're improving accuracy. And then we also want to have better receiving processes and better outbound processes. And that's a shipping type process. Okay. Now, just so you know, there were still card systems when I started, but this is kind of the evolution of WMS. So I do want to talk about it so you can get a full efficiency of a full reflection of where we've been, where we're going, and what problems we were trying to solve. Obviously, early on, they had card systems. That was your inventory system. You'd have a card for the inventory. They'd say, okay, I took 5. They'd subtract 5 off the card, and then I added 10. 10 came in. I added 10 back to the card. So you had an actual physical card system. We're talking about card systems were still widely used. Well, it's probably before the advent of the computer systems for the most part. So we're talking about the 50s and maybe early 60s, but the 50s particular in back. They came along with MRP, and well, first off, you started with computer transactions. Then the transaction became on the computer, so you could maintain now a more perpetual inventory, which was simply a card system on a computer. Is what it really boiled down to. MRP came along and added a planning function that allowed us to say, based on our demand or these customer orders, this is what we have in inventory, so this is what we need to produce or buy. So that became the integrated type system that allowed us better visibility, but you still were doing same basic transactions. We realized a long time, though, that having a transaction that we pretty much wrote down or validated on a piece of paper and came back wasn't the most efficient way to do this, because not only is there all kinds of opportunity for error, we also had plenty of opportunity to misplace that piece of paper, not transact that. There's a number of things that could happen there. Next came along the evolution of barcode and scanning, and really what that was better ways to optimize this highly manual system. In other words, rather than keying in information, they would scan it, so we knew they had the right order. But it still was primarily barcoded pick list and things like that. The next evolution was mobile transactions, and just so you know, I've designed a number of mobile transactions. It really boils out, mobile was an extension of barcode and scanning. And what it said is that rather than taking just the barcode and scanning mechanism, we need to make that mobile. And then we had to have applications that moved us closer to the point of transaction, because we can increase efficiency, we can increase accuracy. So when you ask that, what's the difference between mobile and warehouse management? Here's what it really boils down to. You think of mobile transactions, they were primarily a pay point system. So if you initiated a pick, when you picked it, you could tell it was picked. You couldn't tell where it was, and then and really what it really says is you could tell it was picked. You couldn't tell anything else about it except you picked it, up until the point you shipped it. Then you might have a mobile set of transactions for shipping. So you knew you shipped it. In between time, you knew it was picked, you have no idea where it is. So you had all that gray area out there. So when you think of mobile transactions, they were primarily a mobile a mobile answer to the same transactions you were doing on the native system is really what you're talking about. You're talking about a mobile screen. Uh, but what happened with mobile transactions is every time you wanted to change the transaction or develop a new transaction, you had to bring in a developer. So there was many iterations where you were developing all the time for mobile. Then lastly is the warehouse management system. And what it did is took the capabilities of mobile and adding a architecture to it that allow you to track it throughout its process, because you have concepts of things like waves and work and those kind of things. And just so you know, when you go pick an item, it shows that you have it in the WMS system till you put it someplace, and then it tells you put it there. So if you've designed a process that says, I'm going to go pick this set of orders, I'm going to put it in a staging area, and then I'm going to pack it from there, it supports that. So while you're picking it, it shows you have it. You are a warehouse or a location within the warehouse. And it shows then when you put it in the staging location, it's in the staging location till you run your packaging process. And then it goes from staging through the packaging process to where you're ultimately going from there. And normally you're going from there into some kind of shipping line. Okay, on the mobile transactions, I think we kind of covered everything here, but let's see if there's anything available at the point of execution. At least you know at the point when you scanned it, that's what the transaction was at that point. We did improve the accuracy because we could put validations in there. We were able to optimize certain types of things. We now tied the physical process to the process in the computer, and it created more consistencies in our operations. You know, when you're passing paper back and forth, there's no guarantee you have all the papers. So you don't have a complete status of anything at any time like you do in a WMS system. Typically, if in a well-running WMS system, when you look at the inventory, it is current. It's up to date. So you know you have 100. So again, what we talked about is mobile transactions. I think we covered this too. You couldn't cover all the inventory movements. Couldn't support all the requirements. There's no way to measure productivity. If you can't measure something, it's very difficult usually to improve a process unless it's accuracy. But if you have a process that you can define, you can measure, you can define a better process, and from there you have something to measure against. We talked about, okay, and really very little configuration. So really mobile transactions were good for their time. They were certainly better when they had, but they were very, very limited. So, defining WMS to match the physical process. Rush order. We go right from pick to ready to go out the door. So we put it in a box while we're picking it and then stage it for the shipment out the door. Standard orders. We do a pick, we do a pack, and then we go to a stage. A UPS order, we might do a pick, multiple picks, we do a consolidation to a consolidated area, then we go ahead and pack, and that goes to a staging area. So those are just examples of different processes to consider. And I'll give you another example. Just think about the UPS orders. It gives you a way to say, these are all my UPS orders. UPS comes at 4 o'clock. I want to make sure that I've picked all those orders by 3:30. So it gives you some of those kind of capabilities you would not have as an organizational structure within a a standard just mobile system. Keep in mind, we developed a lot of software maybe to help optimize these processes, but it's like RF Smart. Actually, there's absolutely no reason to have that product once you have a WMS system. It is the WMS system has everything that it has plus markedly more. And I'm not saying you can't do a sub optimization that you might use it, but I don't see any merit because you can do a sub optimization into the WMS system. You'll find most of the time people use things because they don't understand what they have. By the way, this should get more interesting. I'm hoping so, but no, I think it's something that we. So we're talking about need to support different processes. Okay, I'm just going to go through and define some.
Hey, Don,
Yeah,
can I jump in?
sure,
Quick
of course.
question. I
Hmm.
used RF Smart 10 years ago
Right.
with AX 2009,
Hmm.
and it seemed to work well at the time, and there was a void in
Hmm.
the core product. Will D365 WMS put some of these other players, these ISV players, out of business?
Well, I think they should,
I mean,
and
or said
yeah.
differently, is there any need to you? Are there any third-party WMS systems that still provide supplementary functionality that
Well,
core WMS and
oh yeah,
D365 doesn't do?
yeah. Let's talk about at the high end. At the high end, you have the large WMS players. The D365 advanced WMS is what we call a tier 1.5. It's pretty good. But in my way of thinking, it doesn't scale to very large warehouse operations very well. And what I'm talking about is because they're all in the single database. You don't have redundancy. You don't have you've got a transaction volume that has to be handled. And so in large warehouse operation where they got multiple warehouses, you might look at something like a Manhattan or a High Jump. So if any of you ever get in a situation where you want to talk about WMS systems and what might be the best role to play, what risk
Okay.
they're going to look at, because here's what the difference is. When you look at these large player WMS systems, they're asynchronous systems. And I don't like that the AX system is a synchronous system. It effectively, you send a transaction to the warehouse, like you send a sales order to the warehouse. Boom, that's it. There's no, and also inventory is separate. So you have the inventory, the financial inventory, and then you have the locational inventory in the WMS system. The advantage you have with it being asynchronous is that if the main system goes down, that warehouse keeps on chugging along. Or if one warehouse goes down, all the rest of your warehouse keep chugging along. If in the AX or the 365 environment, if it goes down for some reason, all your warehouses are shut down. Um, so on the high end, you have those high end WMS systems. And so we were interfacing to those in earlier versions. The reason why is that there wasn't anything out there. You had to do something else within 2009 and before. Now, many of us designed, like we designed our own mobile transactions. A lot of people used RF Smart, and then you also have other third-party WMS systems, but most of the time what they referred to as a WMS system was mobile transactions. They weren't really WMS systems. What we talked about Manhattan, of course, those were. Moving forward, I don't see any reason to use products like RF Smart. But some people do feel they still have a reason. But clearly, RF Smart is available on the current versions. I don't know, other than they pay for a lot of parties and stuff like that, how well they're doing within the system now. But in my opinion, no. In my experience with RF Smart wasn't good. So maybe, but you had to have something before they truly introduced. In my way of thinking, the most significant thing that's happened in my career within the AX side was the WMS. The most single impact of any product was the WMS. because it solved the biggest single problem we had, is we had no warehouse system. Did that answer the question, Jeff?
Yeah, it did. It did.
Okay.
And I've also worked with a client that used high jump as well, and I understand what you mean about it being, tier one product,
Yeah.
because it was used in an environment where the one of the client's largest customers was Home Depot. You can
Mm-hmm.
imagine the shipping volumes and the
Right.
complexity there. So it also supported the pick to light system,
Mm-hmm.
which WMS here doesn't seem to do.
Oh,
But yes,
we've done it.
answer my question. Thank
I mean, more importantly, Vista. We had Pictolite. It's an interface, is all. Same thing with voice picking. They're just interfaces. In fact, Invista has that working. It's at a college in Indianapolis you can go see. So think of it. It's not the WMS. It's the interfacing not being available for the WMS. But the differences is scalability. Uh, and there's smaller things. Maybe I'll touch on them later in this, but that's what it's really more about. So okay, let me go back to the need to support different processes. So large customers with unique needs. Keep in mind, a lot of times it's labelings, all that kind of stuff, so it makes more sense a lot of times to bring all of the materials for all of the orders together, and then go through one picking with multiple people picking, and bring it to a staging area, and then assemble the orders off of that. If you think about it, depending on what type of orders they are and how your warehouse is set up, it can create a lot of efficiency by staging it. Not caring about what order it's going on, just caring whether or not it needs it. Because the other advantage is that you cut down the number of picks. Let's say I'm dealing with 10 orders I'm trying to assemble. Think about the advantage of that is that if 10 orders had 10 of the same part on it. Rather than sending it through the warehouse 10 times, it would send through the warehouse one time. And if there was one each on one of them, telling you to pick 10 rather than pick 10 times. So it just gives you some quick ideas of economy of scale you can achieve. Carriers and shipping zones. I'm shipping to X zone on Wednesday. I want to be able to, issue the picks for that shipping zone, so that we're satisfying that zone for that group of orders. Small package. Your need for a small package order, and we're also talking about maybe UPS too, but you get an idea. Smaller package or smaller picking process where I'm picking individual components rather than whole pallets of things. Rush orders. Okay? Rush order should be able to support an additional handling or special handling. And let me illustrate for you what that might be. On a rush order, I might pick it and deliver it to a rush order area. And people know that once anything in that area has a priority to be picked, and also you can prioritize the work so that it also reflects that. Replenishment first. I'm trying to remember what I was referring to here. Oh, I know what they're trying to say here. I don't know. I don't know. I like the terminology I used here. But if you also need to support replenishment, let me make sure you understand what replenishment means. Is replenishment has a number of different aspects, and really what they're talking about here is two things: the replenishment process itself, and that's where I have what's called a pick face. And a pick face, there's any number of different things about the theory on a pick face and what it should look like. I think I covered that or talk about that a little bit later, or probably tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but I mean Thursday. But I need to be able, as I use as I use up the individual items on the pick face, I need to have something that kicks off replenishment to go replenish those pick face areas. The other one is what's called cross docking, and I think that's what I was referring to here. Cross docking is the ability to, rather than bringing materials that you're receiving from purchasing or production and putting them away in the warehouse, I want to take them and putting in a cross dock area and assemble that shipment to go to another warehouse in my warehouse group. It's typically called cross docking because there's no something that's going to go right back out the door to another warehouse. You don't want to go through a put away process because then you're just going to go back through and pick it again. So you want to go right from wherever its output is coming off of that into a what's called a cross dock area, and that's another special requirement. And then of course you got special product handling. And I'm not going to go through all these. It's just that it gives you some flavor of some of the different processes that you could have that can affect how you actually are processing this through the warehouse. Okay, I think I probably beat this to death, but rule-based process, I think we all understand what that is. It allows me to define the rules and the processes so that they're consistent with each other. I think we've pretty much covered that. Improve visibility too is the one thing I probably haven't talked about as much, because if you know that it's done, in other words, when you look at inventory, if you're a real-time transactions, it really reflects what is typically there if it's utilized correctly. So now here's some of the things that we use. So think about it, it's not just the WMS system. Then there's this whole host of other types of hardware and software that's considered part of the WMS system. It's not necessarily within 365, but it's part of the overall warehouse management system. So we're now talking about a whole another set of considerations that are integrated many times into these warehouse systems. So some of them are like an RF device or handheld RF. Barcoded pallets, we're going to call, you're going to know these later as license plates. You've got RFID. Now, just so you know, RFID, when it came out, everybody was all excited about it. It was initiated by Walmart. The typical industry joke is that what is the payoff rate for RFID? The answer is we don't know. We've never had a payoff. So it works in some aspects. Where I've seen it work the most, and if anybody else has seen where it's worked well, is primarily with identifying containers. See, like in many process manufacturing businesses, they have containers that go out with the product. They scan them or catch them with RFID tags going out. Then they also can clock them back in when they come back in, so they know at any time without any manual transactions where those tanks effectively are, whether they're in-house or out of house. You get conveyor systems. You get into these large warehouses. These conveyor systems are actually managed and handled by computer systems that route the packages based on criteria about or information within the systems. It's coming from the customer system or ERP system. Then you also have things like voice enable type processes, and where voice enabled is rather than keying, you talk to the to the device, and the cost on the voice-enabled stuff has come down to where it's starting to be more and more attractive. Vocalect is one of the big players I know in that industry. Okay, so benefits, accuracy, reason why accuracy, point of transaction, and the fact that we can validate. You're going to increase the order fulfillment. Okay, part of it is you're going to also have the user directed to the pick location so that it is directed by the system rather than being randomly selected hope from the best, because on any pick list you can't identify every place it's at and also know that you want to. You want to send somebody to pick it at a certain location. We increase the visibility. We also have, in many different ways, discrete location, what's called LPN, which we're going to cover later, and things like inventory statuses, because just because it's in inventory doesn't mean it's any good. It could be on hold. We're improving productivity. Also, it's part of that is it's system or user directed work, so it's the highest priority. It comes first. You're collecting detailed execution history, and you can also reduce or eliminate the annual physical, and that's through a good cycle counting strategy that's demonstrated a certain level of accuracy. So what can you control within a WMS system? Well, one of the things are locations. So one of the things you want to control is the locations. What do I put? Where do I put it? Why do I put it there? Where do I want to go get it? In what quantity do I want to go get it? So there's a lot of different things you can control with locations. You also have priority. Can I establish this is going to be a higher priority? So you can control the priority. You can also then control the process. We defined it how you define a rules-based process. Then you also can control logical groupings. You can act on certain groups of products, whether it be a carrier, whether it be something that just came out of production that's been on hold for a while. There can be any number of different types of logical groupings you can define and execute on. So now we're going to talk, this should get a little more interesting, because now we're getting into more practical. If you look at a typical warehouse, you will see that they're all pretty much set similar to these similar type of locations. And you'll notice in the WMS systems, they'll typically have some kind of areas like that too. So what you've got here is that you typically have a receiving area. So these are docks coming in, and there's going to be typically a receiving area. Now the receiving area means that it's registered. You don't necessarily pick out a receiving area, but there's no reason why you couldn't. Then you have what's called a picking area and a bulk area. Now, a picking area is where you're picking usually less than a pallet or less than a carton, and a bulk area where you might be picking a carton or a pallet. Obviously, something coming out from that's already palletized, you wouldn't necessarily have to pack. It can go directly to the staging area. But also things you're picking uniquely, you might have to go to a packing area, and what the packing area would be is to put multiple different products within a set of boxes. You may have a requirement for a packing area. Well, here's the other thing. The packing area also collects for you what is in what box and allows for serialization of the containers. So this will satisfy many of your EDI requirements, is that type of thing. A staging area where we're putting the materials coming from these areas into for a sub-organization or just getting these ready to go to a specific bay area or bay door. and this is where we're going to ship them from. So staging is getting it ready for shipment. It also could be an area where we're bringing 100 order, or no, 100 is usually no. Let's say we're bringing 10 orders or 50 orders from a Walmart. We might be organizing it here, but then we might run it through a packing area to package the individual orders and then send them to the Bay Area. Okay. So this is an indication of receiving area. It's typically something where product comes in, it's in here temporarily for the most part, and it usually comes in so that you can acknowledge you received it, and then you're going to have a separate put away process. You look at bulk storage, it's primarily for, if we're talking about it's typically when we look at bulk storage, we're typically talking about containers or pallets of a singular unit. In other words, this might be all cables, a container of cables or any type of product you want. But typically bulk storage is something where you'd receive it directly from the vendor, you'd put it in bulk storage, but then you would break it down for other types of picking processes. A picking area. This is for a small item pick area, but effectively, as you're seeing here, is that you're seeing rows and locations that it will tell you to go to this picking area and pick this product from this location. And then also, it could tell you to also scan to make sure you're in the right locations. A verification you actually did go to the right location. It might also have you scan the item. So I want to make sure you understand is that you control how much validation. A lot of times what people do is they'll start out with a lot of validation. Then once we're operating better, we may cut out a validation step for efficiency. But keep in mind, if you control you can even go to validation to scanning how many you pick, by the way. So I don't necessarily recommend that, but you can see where you can get to the point where you can even validate how many you picked by scanning each one. Okay. Staging. So here's an area, here's our picking. This is a stage. This is getting orders ready to go to a staging lane. Oh, packing area, I probably should have moved, but again, here's what a packing area typically looks like. And again, it's a UPS order would most times go through a packing area is what it really boils down to, that kind of stuff. Small package orders. And the Bay Area is where I'm actually getting the orders ready and sending it to a bay door where I've got a more or less of a scheduled pickup from a specific carrier. All right, so I'll go ahead and we'll start WMS organizational elements. So here are the foundation. This is what you need for a WMS. You have to have locations, which means warehouses and locations. And so it's subdivided and architected any way you want to, but you've got to have a place where you're putting things so you know where it's at. Zones. And a zone is a cross-section that can support many different types. What it really does for me, and keep in mind, you can interpret things a lot different, and when you get into this more, you'll start to see how there's a lot of crossover in thought and how you use it. But effectively, a zone to me is an area of similar locations. And what's nice about it is the zone can cross many different areas of a warehouse. So think of a zone as a horizontal slice, whereas a location is a vertical. So zones are groups of locations with similar characteristics that for whatever reason you want to identify. A freezer would be one. A raw materials area could be another one. So you begin to see that. Obviously, inventory. You've got to have somebody that's going to do the work. It's nice to have orders and the
So,
equipment.
sorry,
Yeah,
uh, Don.
yeah,
It's Lauren.
yeah.
Can you back up to your definition of a zone again?
A
Because
zone is a logical area that it can be associated to multiple locations that has a specific characteristic or characteristics. I'll give you an example.
yeah, hit those
High
examples.
bay, high bay. If I have a high bay, I have certain equipment that I need for that zone.
Right.
So high bay would be a zone, and in my logic, and they may drive things to there, or I may not, depending on the type and the nature of the product, because high bay is going to take a lot of effort and special equipment versus a freezer. That can be a zone.
But
Uh,
why would a freezer be a zone rather than a
well,
location?
freezer, the zone for frozen foods. A zone, you have multiple freezers,
Oh, okay, okay,
but
okay. No,
it's the zone of freezers.
okay,
Okay, like I might only have two freezers, but I still may want to have a zone for frozen foods because I want the fact that the food is frozen to say I want you to look for a location in the area or the zone for frozen food.
okay.
Okay.
So that part I agree with. When you first said freezers, I'm like, no,
Oh, right. I'm
freezers a
sorry. Right.
location.
The
Yeah,
typical example people use is the differentiate from frozen food to refrigerated food to
dry.
for in the food industry. But there's
Yeah,
any
to
number
dry
of
or
reasons.
repack or yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
any number of reasons I use zones.
Okay.
I use just hundreds of reasons I use zones. It's
Yeah.
really a zone allows me within the query system, which we'll talk about later. That's one other element I can grab to say, look, I want you to get it out of this zone. Is really how it works. Okay.
Yep. Yep. Okay, that part I agree with. Thank you.
Okay. And then of course we got to have customers and vendors. So uh, now, what I've done here, and I don't think I'm going to go through every one of these, but what I've done is I've defined in the version I was working with, by the way, all of the WMS processes that you have. And I think once you start to look at them, you can see there's a lot of processes that are supported. And these are just the base processes. So let's go across a couple of them. And this is more for a list more than anything else. But you have on sales order, you have a shipping process, a picking process, a packing process, and a loading process. Loading means I have loaded it on the carrier. Purchase orders, you have a purchase order item receiving, a combined receiving and put away, and a return. So what we're doing here, but I want to go through and get you an idea of some of the ones that are. Here's Kanban inventory, movement by template, adjust in and out, cycle counting, status change, replenishment, location inquiry, license plate inquiry, RMA processing, quality processing. But really, what I wanted to do is I wanted to really kind of get to this page so you can see then there's all kinds of other things you can do with the WMS system so that you're picking up all kinds of other processes to get you a full set of processes. So warehouse transfer, cluster picking, which we're going to talk about, containerization, license plate receiving. Really, what I wanted to give you an idea of the depth of what this WMS system has. To give you an idea what there is quite a number of transactions. Then you get, sorry about that. Other work means it creates other work. Indirect means it's an indirect process where reprint, display open work list. So there's just a lot of processes that you'll learn through this system. And I went through, this was an attempt to define all the current ones available. Okay. So we talked about zones quite a bit, but But again, we optimize the space, special requirements, and better planning for people and equipment. In other words, I send them, again, if I'm going to the high lift, I got to have the right equipment, okay, is what it boils down to. And somebody can operate the equipment. Now we get into some the kind of the areas that we're really now getting into the nuts and bolts of how the WMS system actually works. So the first concept I want you to understand is what's called a wave. A wave is a process that is run anytime I have a picking process. So what does this what's a picking process? Well, when you have a picking process, you're picking material from a location in preparation for shipment. So sales orders would be part of it. Transfer orders would be part of it. Production would be part of it, picking the production elements, and then Kanban. But let me explain what it does and how it does it. It allows you to prioritize. So I could say, I want my rush orders to be in a single wave, which I want to run every 15 minutes. So what is out there is it's constantly going out there every 15 minutes looking for any new order that's come in as a rush order. So what we've defined there is it has an element of prioritization and also has an element of grouping. The rush order is a group. Also allows you to pick singular or multiple orders within a wave. So in other words, I can pick multiple single orders, or I can set up the wave to pick multiple orders to go to a staging area. So what it allows you to do is to provide logical groupings that group similar orders together. So in orders, all orders going to zone 3, that's a group. All UPS orders, that's a group. All Walmart orders, that could be a group. All hazardous materials, that could be a group. So I want you to understand that a wave is a creative way of going through your inventory and trying to optimize the number of picks, the priority, and the order in which you want to allocate or reserve your inventory. Because here's the other thing a wave does, is when you run a wave and you've got the priority in the waves, and we'll talk about those in a little more detail, it's going through, and when you do a reservation in the ERP system, you're reserving to the you're reserving to the warehouse location. And if you're batch controlled, down to the batch and or serial number. When you are now in a wave, you're reserving down to the quantity within a location. This is how it creates its directives to say, go to this location and pick this product for this order. Okay, so that's kind of the kind of the hidden background. So when you create an order, and you have different ways you can release that order to the warehouse, but once it's released to the warehouse, then the wave can take over, and when the wave picks it up, then it creates what's called work. And the work says, go pick this and put it here, is what we're really doing. So what it does is it defines the picking process and the elements of the picking process. Does that all make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'll give you an
Yes.
example. You can even do a temporary one to say, look, we've had this product that's been on allocation. It came in. I want to run a wave that says, give me all the back orders for this product. Also, people use it as a way of controlling how much is on the floor. We have waves that can be can be automatically initiated based on the number of order lines or limited to a number of order lines. Or we have people that release waves based on them controlling what waves they release, where they release them to, based on volume, because they don't want to release so much that there's so much out there that it's hard to. Well, they're doing it within regards to capacity. And I'll give you another example. If you released everything, what if I had an optimization where I wanted to do a UPS order at 3 o'clock? Or UPS, all my UPS stuff at 3 o'clock for them being at 4. That all the capacity would be consumed. So a lot of people will release waves in groups of orders, even though they're picking single orders. It's kind of the idea. So there's any number of different reasons or methodology behind waves, but think of a wave as just a way of controlling what we're going to pick. Is really what we're really doing. A wave results in what's called work. What is work? Now, as a functional consultant, I'm not sure I know what work is. I know it when I see it. We like to say in our business, we're good at watching work and telling you what's wrong with it, but doing it is something that if we're really doing our job, we're not doing because we're teaching the client. So think about, and I want you to start thinking about now, the work is created any number of different ways, but just in the correlation of what we talked about, the wave created what's called work. The work means I am going to do something. It shows up in what's called the work queue. It means that something has initiated my need to do work. So let's talk about, so think about it, it's a resultant process. Work is always the resultant of initiating something else. So I'll give you an example, a PO receipt. There's no work for a PO receipt. I have to go say I'm receiving the purchase order. But once you receive the purchase order, it creates work. It creates work to put it away. So, and that's why I say it's typically a resulting process. It allows elements that tie into the possibilities of the inventory process. Work many times has elements that says, this is where you're getting it from, this is where it's going to. And that's where we use zones. We may not, we may not do what's called directed put away. Very difficult to do. So I might default a location, but it allows me to to get the right area, and that's why a lot of times I'll use a zone to define the area where I want this product to go to. So it could be some production warehouse, or not production, some production location. It can be just about anything. It also provides the control for accuracy. So part of the process of work is you're doing on the handheld. You're defining the validations, and that's also why it's executed on mobile devices. Doesn't have to be. You could do simulations of it, but in the end of the day, it's primarily meant to be a transaction type process that a warehouse worker would do using a handheld. And the nice thing about it is work, once it's picked up, it knows it's picked up. Once it's put, it knows it's been put, so it tracks it the whole time. An idea, if you look at work queue, and Don's had this same work for 2 days, there's probably something wrong with that work that we need to figure out what happened with it. So think about it when we talk about increasing visibility. By knowing what work is out there and whether or not it's being in process, we've created a whole nother level of information we didn't have. And also we can measure it. And also, I just put that there because work does validations. I want to talk about another concept. Is called license plate. How many of you have you heard as a license plate is applied to WMS, or how many have not? That's probably more appropriate.
I had not.
Okay.
Yeah, never.
Okay. Well, a license plate is a serialized group of products. When I'm not leaving, a group of products that has a serial number at the package level. Most typically a pallet. So now I can identify it down to what's called a license plate. So license plate now adds to the elements that I can consider in moving inventory. Also, by the way, once it's license plated, I can transact by the license plate. Let me give you the most vivid example where license plate is used, because I think sometimes that's the best. I have a serialized item. Okay? Within one pallet, I have 100 serial numbers. What would you rather do? Move the 100 serial numbers, one serial number at a time, or move the license plate? I think the answer to that is obvious. You'd want to be able to transact against the license plate. So what we're saying is that once you have a license plate, you know now you have a serial number associated with whatever's on that or in that container. So it increases a lot of efficiency. Now here's two of the major things that people will kind of sometimes disagree with me on them, and sometimes they won't. But in the industry practice, when you are in inventory or receiving materials, you are receiving the same product in every license plate. It doesn't have to be. You can break it so that it can do that, I believe. But generally, when you're receiving a product, it expects to receive the same product on the pallet. So a license plate typically on the inventory side is whatever's on that, whatever is in that license plate is usually the same part number. It can be multiple units of issues, but the same part number. On the shipping side, the license plate represents the items that have been assembled to that pallet. So that means by its nature, you have multiple products in multiple different products. It could be the same product, but it could also be multiple different products on a singular license plate. It has a different need. It's trying to track and cut down on the number of inventory transactions once an order's been actually assembled. So now if I assembled 3 serialized items, the same serial number in different products on that, it would know not only what those serialized items within that license plate was, it would know all the other items on that license plate. So now I can transact by using the license plate itself. So it's a way of identifying multiple products within a logical grouping. And I want to get into unit of measure now, because I want to talk about unit of measure and what some of the limitations on unit of measure is. The unit of measure in AX does not follow the inventory transaction. So when you look at inventory, you're typically looking at what's called the inventory unit of measure. So if it's using the concept of each, let's say, well, each is one unit of measure. That's your stocking, and by the way, that's your pricing unit of measure. If you now go and think about, what about all my other units of measure? Well, this each comes in a pack of 12. Okay, that pack of 12 comes in a box of 10 12s. On the pallet now, we have 100 boxes. Small item. So, but it doesn't really handle that in inventory, and because and also it's very difficult to do. But in some systems I've used, the unit of measure actually transacts with the product itself, so that when I look in inventory, I can say how many pallets I have. Here's where your problem is that since unit of measure is not identified within the warehouse, we have to identify its other ways. Those two major ways, and it's very important you understand this because I want to go back and make sure everybody understands what it is. One of the two ways is the utilize of license plate. Kind of identifies if it's a license plate item, we know it's a pallet. That's one way to do it. Keep in mind that you can also still say, within that pallet, I could also pick boxes, and I could have a part of a pallet, so it would know that on this pallet I only had 50 boxes left on this license plate. Or I do it through some manner of zone or storage considerations. In other words, I have an area for bulk storage. I have an area for pallet. So because of that limitation, we need to create a visibility to the packaging. I'd just like to have somebody comment on that, if whether it's questions or experience or any other elements around that you want to identify.
Hey, Don, this is Ed. I did have one I wanted to ask a question about. Can you have license plates in license plates? Like, say you have half-size pallets and you have two of them on a pallet, so you have each half pallet has a license plate, and then the pallet has a license plate, so you have multiples.
It's my understanding you can.
Yes, you can.
Yeah,
It's
but I've
called
not nested license plates, right?
It's called nested license plates. Yes.
But I haven't done it myself. But
Yeah,
Okay.
I haven't either.
yeah, I know it's capable, but typically you don't. Now you may pick out of a license plate. Just so you know, you may pick boxes out of a license plate. You don't necessarily recommend picking eaches out of a license plate unless the each is the one level. You understand? And if it's 3 levels, you don't necessarily try to pick eaches out of boxes, right?
Correct.
You want to break them down so that the box goes to a picking area that picks each. But in general, you're not limiting to picking off a license plate. It's just a matter of it's logical. Usually there's 2 different places to go to pick an each versus a pallet or partial pallet is kind of the idea.
Yeah, I would think it'd be bulk or.
Yeah, that's in fact the example I showed you was it said bulk. Bulk to me means palletized or non-broken out materials.
Well, and I think the nesting of license plates is typically done in cross-docking, where you might have a master license plate that refers to a pallet of all kinds of goods, and the component goods of each item number can have their own license plate.
Okay, and that makes sense. Although because it sounds like they're trying to make the receiving a lot easier, but I don't know where the validation would be then. So you see where I'm going. I mean, now you're receiving the license plate, but it might be for a hierarchical for something like an EDI type transaction too.
When I worked with HP, we had some servers or some types of servers or enclosures that may weigh 300 or 400 pounds a piece. So they would be on half a pallet, and it would be labeled and have a license plate, and then we would have 2 of them per pallet whenever we shipped them out. So that's my reference.
And I could see where nesting it on the shipping side would be more common than on the receiving side.
Right.
Okay. Does everybody comfortable is a relative term. Does everybody see the impact of unit of measure? because we'll be going more into this kind of stuff in much greater detail. One, I want to make sure you understand that's why you have license plate and why you have to segregate this materials in some way to make sure you're picking the right unit.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay. So here is really, I'm just really talking about an overall flowchart of the warehouse functions. We're going with what's called a wave. Let's start on the wave side. We run the wave. It initializes work. That work uses what's called a location directive, and it tells you, when you think of work, it has two processes all the time, minimum of two. If there's a pick, there has to be a put. So the work's created, it looks at the location directive that says, based on this location directive, where do I want to pick it from? The user goes ahead and processes the pick on the handheld. It moves the inventory to the user location, and it then goes to the put location. It goes back through the location directives and says, okay, based on this work, where do I want to put it? It puts in the location. That location can be something like a bay area or something like that. So I've now taken the order, I've picked it, and I've put the materials for that order in a staging or a bay area. So really I'm trying to illustrate the integration of work. Let's also look at an incoming. I've got a PO receiving. I scan the PO receiving, and effectively what's called is I register the receipt of the purchase order. That creates work. The work has a pick and a put. It utilizes the location directives to decide where in inventory I'm going to put it. So I pick it from the receiving area, I put it to an area designated by the location directive. This is how I'm controlling where I'm putting it. So from here now, I also have on the X outgoing then, and I've got a shipment process that I do against it that then ships it out the door. And the packaging operation is just a separate operation. The packaging is a byproduct of putting materials in a certain area. It can create work or directly put it in an area. So what I'm really trying to identify here are two major things for you. One is the rework is primarily a resulting process of something. It uses the location directive to say where. So think about the work is the what, the location directive is the where. And that's really the wave, the work, and the location directive, for the most part. It's an oversimplification for me to say this, but for the most part, that's the majority of new things you have to know. It's that simple. Those three elements is what makes a WMS system unique. It's those elements itself. Because it allows me to define the type of work, the type of locations, and the initiating factors. And again, all we're showing here is this mostly done on mobile applications where communicating the complete what the work is. This system will be a lot of fun once we get through the processes. Let's see what time we still got good. I'm just going to go as far as we can go today, and then pick it up again on Thursday. So I'm going to go through, and I'm just basically now going through the processes more in detail. So when we talk about receiving, really the main thing, we can improve receiving by directed put away. I'm not one that necessarily, when I say directed put away, believes that you need to have capacity considerations. You can use them. What directed put away typically means is that the computer is telling me where to put it based on an inventory availability of the location. And that can be capacity or volume or quantities. There's any number of different ways you can drive that. But it becomes more complex. What I mostly care about is the accuracy and the visibility. Because what I want to do is it doesn't make, in theory, if I'm directing you to a general location or area, in more or less saying, find a space to put it in, that's called a user directive, and that is fine, as long as I do the following. I effectively identify what I am putting away and what location went to. I do that through using validation rules. Like I could validate the item, I could validate the location, and I could also validate something like a license plate if I'm receiving a license plate. So it's critical to have a good receiving process. And that's typically when I'm trying to improve a warehouse where I start, because you're not putting it in the right place coming in, it's not going to get any better on down. So that's one of the first things we want to tackle is a disciplined receiving process. So, and we look at this, here's the pre-receipt activities. You're typically scheduling the carrier. He's and you may actually reprint the receipt list as something, this is coming in, but you have to arrange for a time for the schedule can receive it. Carrier arrives and it's unloaded. They're registered, and then put away work is created. So when we bring it in the receiving area, there might be a temporary move or something like that, but generally think of the receiving area as an area where we bring the materials into the building. Anything else from there would be a put away logic. Now you can have a receiving that does a put away directly after that, or you can have a receiving that registers at the receipt location and then a separate put away. Somebody comes to the area, sees this needs to be moved, and goes from there. Then post-receiving, you got to break down the shipment, right, in its components that you can put away, any labeling or quality processor you need to run, and a lot of times they'll send the packing list then to the accounting, because it'll be coming, a vendor invoice will be coming somewhat after that at some point. Then you go ahead and do the put away process, and you basically pick up the materials, that's your pick, the work is processed, and the items are put away, and that's your put process. And the only other things I added to this because I felt it was important, unless it's a cross dock, and then a lot of times you're taking and creating the outbound shipment you're getting ready. So you may be taking that to a cross dock area where you're preparing an order to go to another warehouse. So inbound processes. Purchase orders, inbound process. Production report is finished. Receipt from the production order. Receipt of a transfer order. Receipt of an RMA. Those are all instances of an inbound process. And you have to initiate something with the handheld to create the work in all those. Okay? Now here's an example of a PO work template. So what we're getting into now is we're starting to define for you how the work is, the templates are actually set up for the work. And what we're seeing here is the work order type is purchase orders. So this is a purchase order work template. And it's really saying, in this case, it doesn't really, but effectively we've got a template for 62, and really what this is a PO direct put away, and here's you've got a pick and a put, and you've got this thing called work class ID. It's an element of identifying work that needs to be produced together. So the class ID couples these two together. Okay. Now there's the template. Now I want to show you an example of a PO receipt. So I'm showing you the receiving process now on the handheld.
Hey, Don, can you comment first on the prior slide
Yeah, sure.
about the sequence numbers? And it looks like it's the work templates are set up by warehouse.
Mm-hmm. But they don't have to be. Yeah.
But I don't know why you'd have a work template sequence structure that includes disparate warehouses like this, 25, 61, 51, 62, so on and so forth.
Well, think about it, there is a hierarchy. Okay, so what's important is if you had in work something that was unique that you wanted to catch first and then everything else drops down below, that allows you to do that. I'll give you an example. I might have a work template for crossdock. I might have a work template for rush. The idea behind that is that I want that to drop through first within its going through the process so that it goes there first and then everything else. I don't have to implicitly define everything. I just have to define the exceptions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It just looks like this example that's coming out of probably the Contoso or demo environment.
Yeah.
It's just a little contrived.
Well, I'm not. They're all contrived, right? Until you actually do them. What this is, though,
I think
is
by contrived he meant stupid.
Well, yeah, and we've referred to it in a non-technical term as that. But but I will say this much: I typically do try to organize around warehouses many times, because if something changes different in that warehouse, unless the processes are exactly it's now I have more control, if that makes sense. You're a lot of times organizing around those areas.
You see, to me, this work template that's on the slide looks more like a zone type work order where all of these things in that sequence fall within that zone, even though they're in different warehouses.
Right.
That's what it looks like to me.
Okay. Well, then, no, this is saying for every warehouse. We're looking here on everything. Let me explain where the difference might be that you might be thinking about. And again, if you see the work class ID, there also has to be a way you can control what location directives you're going to use. So there's another reason why you might want to use a different. So when you talk about zone, if you're talking about location directives, the answer would be yes there. Okay? But we'll get in more and more, but what I want to do is give you an example of here's the work. I wanted to show you the process that this template, so this is just the setup. Now we're going to go through and receive the purchase order, because I wanted to start getting you some information on what happens now. Now we're on the handheld. Okay? what I've got to do is the first thing, I've got to define that we've received this item. So this creates the work that we're going to talk about. Okay, so I scan in as this PO54. It comes up and says, okay, what item are you receiving? So it scans in the item and it says A001, line number 1. It says what quantity, and also, by the way, what unit of measure. Okay, 100. Okay, what I've done now is I've registered that purchase order through the handheld. This created the work. And the work created used the 62 PO Direct work template. All right? Which is Site 6, Warehouse 62. So if we go back, and I wasn't trying to show you all about the work template. I just want to show you that it does. All I'm saying is use this work template. And we can, by the way, establish a priority of work and within the work templates too. And how it identified, it uses this work class then to tie that to location directives. But the key is here is I have to have a template that tells me to put it away, is what this does. So then I'll go forward and now we'll go through the rest of it. So now I created this work, and it's created this work ID. You can see it's order number 54, the one we had. Line, it's going Site 6, Warehouse 62. So, and I'll just show you this, what we did here is, notice this work. There's two different ways that this work could have been initiated on the handheld. This was a system directed, which means the system said, this work is out here, I want you to do it. Or it could have been the user directive where they scanned the work number in and it effectively then brought this screen up. What it was saying though, I'm going to pick up this purchase order in the receiving location, this license plate. And this was automatically generated. I may not be license plating, but some locations have to be license plate enabled. In those cases, I automatically create the license plate. I just don't really use it, except for within this transaction. Okay, there's work 2. It's saying purchase order pick. That's the second line. Okay, and so it just verified. Let me go back.
How would you have a pick? You would have a put, not a pick.
Yeah, I'm looking at that too.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll go through one later on, but I'm sorry about that. I'll fix that before next time, all right? And then we'll go back through it. But what you should have had there was a put. You're right.
I kind of did this stuff for
nobody caught it. Nobody caught it at AXUG, or I would have fixed it already. So, what had happened? I can tell you exactly what happened. What you're doing is you're copying, when you're creating these new ones, you're copying from one screen to the next. I copied it, but I don't know where the work 2 came from. That's really odd.
Do you have 2 different license plates it's asking you to pick?
No, it looks like it's using an automated license plate.
Well, but there's license plate 390 on work 1.
Yeah.
and license plate 406.
They almost look like
402.
two picks, is what I'm
You're right,
saying.
exactly.
Yeah, they look like two
Yeah.
different picks. I just got the wrong screen on the second one, is what happened.
Yep.
Okay, that's exactly what happened. Now, rather than picking the put, I somehow got the pick screen. Apologize to you. I'll fix that before next time. But does everybody see? I know it looks real complex when you first look at it. When you look at what's happening, though, you have all the information you need to execute this, and you've controlled it through how you set up this work and location directives. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're at 6:05. This might be a good time to go ahead and break. Let's see what we've got left here. Let's.
Technically, your time is up. Just so
Yes,
you know.
I know that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying, right? What happens though is once I get it in these screens,